Hello and welcome to the digital launch for the November issue of Modern Poetry in Translation, or MPT, Rabbit and Banana Leaves, The Food Focus. My name is Kairani Baroka and I'm the editor. I'm an Indonesian woman with red lipstick, a blue tie-dye dress. I'm wearing dangly earrings, and behind me is a background with three different reproductions of the same MPT cover, which is wonderfully illustrated by Pratya Aprilana, and which I have here with me. It's an illustration of tumpeng, the Indonesian celebratory rice dish. And here with us today, we're so lucky to have two of the translators whose work is featured in the Food Focus issue. First, we have Katie Brown, who is a member of Colaboratorio Avila, who kindly contributed a wonderful poem by Lena Yao, who is a Venezuelan writer who specializes in food writing. And we also are very, very lucky to have Salma Harland, who has translated a poem from classical Arabic by the poet Kushajim, who is known for his Epicurean verse. And Salma also contributed a delectable essay about how this poem was turned into a real-life banquet by an Abbasid caliph, complete with an entire menu, which would get you all very hungry. So I'd like to welcome you both, Salma and Katie, to the digital launch. Our first reader is Katie from Colaboratorio Avila. Colaboratorio Avila is a transatlantic translation collective formed by Katie Brown, Claudia Cavain, Maria Gracia Pardo, and Raquel Rivas Rojas to translate into Venezuelan Spanish and share Venezuelan women's voices in English. Katie, I'd love to hear from you and hear more about Colaboratorio Avila before your reading. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us and for sharing Lena's poem. So I'm Katie Brown, I'm a British woman, and today I am wearing a red patterned dress, sitting in my office, which is full of postcards and posters from around the world, trying to bring as much culture into my office to make it a nicer place to be. So Colaboratorio Avila started about 4 years ago now. No, 5 years ago. Time flies. It's made up, as Oka said, of 3 Venezuelans who are living in various parts of the world. So Raquel Rivas Rojas is in Edinburgh in Scotland, Claudia Cavain is in Oklahoma, and Maria Gracia Pardo is in Miami. And so we all meet on Zoom. Depending on how busy we are, it could be every week, every other week, every month, but we always try to keep in contact as much as possible to translate either from English into Spanish, but a very Venezuelan Spanish, with a particular focus on women's writing, or to translate from Venezuelan Spanish into English. And so we kind of flip between the two. And we take our name Colaboratorio Avila from the Avila mountain, which is the backdrop of Caracas, and is one of the things that people always say reminds them of home.
Oh, that's beautiful. Awesome. That's really amazing to hear about. I think it's, I always love hearing about translation collectives and collaborative work. And now feel free to read the introduction that you wrote for us for MPT and the beautiful poem.
Thank you. So food is an obsession for Lena Yao, one of Venezuela's foremost contemporary writers. From poetry to her novels, Yao sees food at the center of relationships, identity, and memory. Yao served as literary advisor for El Sabor de la Ñ, a glossary of literature and gastronomy produced by the Instituto Cervantes in 2011. She has published 3 poetry collections, Trae tu espalda para hacer mi mesa, Lo que contó la mujer canalla, and Bonipaca o la posibilidad de un árbol, as well as the novel Hormigas en la Lengua and the short story collection Bien me sabes. 20 years is nothing is taken from Trae tu espalda para hacer mi mesa, or in English, Bring your back to make my table, in which the taste, look, feel, sound, and smell of food mingle with lust, deception, heartbreak, loss, and re-encounters. Born in Caracas, Yao now lives in Madrid. She is one of the more than 6 million Venezuelans who have left their country during the 2 decades under the Bolivarian Revolution. The original title of the poem, 20 años no es nada, is a famous line from Carlos Gardel's 1935 tango Volver, or To Return, which presents a traveller who longs to return to his home and his love, yet fears the re-encounter with his past. Both Gardel's Traveller and the Odysseus, reimagined in Yao's poem, capture the mixed emotions towards a lost home of the Venezuelan diaspora. So the poem, 20 years is nothing. He returned home, his wife welcomed him. On a splintered melamine plate, the fossil of a veal escalope, his favourite meal. Ulysses' eyes filled with tears. He reached into his pocket for a lotus leaf stolen on the island. He devoured it. 2 seconds later, his memory had emptied. Of those banquets with Calypso and Circe, not even the scent remained. He lovingly kissed Penelope and sat down to dine, taking pleasure. His tongue had forgotten other homelands. So in Spanish, 20 años no es nada. Regresó a su casa. Su mujer lo recibió. Sobre un plato de melamina hastiado, el fósil de un escalope de ternera, su comida favorita. A Ulises se le llenaron los ojos de lágrimas. Buscó en su bolsillo una hoja de loto que robó en aquella isla. La engulló. 2 segundos después, su memoria estaba vacía. De los banquetes con Calipso y con Circe, no quedó ni el aroma. Besó a Penélope con amor y se sentó a comer. Disfrutó. Su lengua había olvidado otras patrias.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, Colaboratori Avila, and thank you, Lena Yao. If it's okay with both of you, I'm going to ask you maybe a couple questions at the end of this, just to get more out of the time you're kindly spending with us here. So thank you so much. And now, Salma Harlan, please feel free to, in this case, I think it'll be fun for you to read out the poem that you translated from Kushajim first, and then get into your wonderful prose piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Selma, and I'm a young Egyptian woman with black hair in a blue jumper, and I'm wearing reading glasses. If it's okay, I'll start off with a very smooth bio of Kushajim himself, and then I'll read the original poem in classical Arabic, followed by my translation into English. So Kushajim was a celebrated 10th century Arab poet, master chef, and polymath of Indo-Persian origin. He served in the court of Saif al-Dawla, the founder and ruler of the Emirate of Aleppo from 945 to 967, and arguably the most famous ruler in Islamic history. So this enabled Kushajim to vividly chronicle social, intellectual, and culinary aspects of court life under the Hamdanid dynasty. He wrote on a really big range of topics, including gastronomical topics. And his known works include Etiquette of the Boon Companion, Adab al-Nadim, The Characteristics of Music, Khasa'is al-Tarab, Book of Snares and Game, Kitab al-Masayid wal-Matarid, an influential collection of poems and a collection of epistles. In this poem, which is called When Will You Come to Eat, Kushajim throws a lavish banquet for a friend suffering from a broken heart to mitigate his sorrows. Along with handsome cupbearers and exquisite singers, the banquet has many delectable dishes from the furthest stretches of the caliphate to please all palates. So the original poem in classical Arabic is called Mata Tanshat al-Akl, which is When Will You Come to Eat? And it goes as follows. متى تنشطر الأكل فقد كللت الجونة وقد زينها الطاهي لنا أحسن تزيينه كما زين ثوب الغيث في الروض أفانينا فجاءت وهي من أطيب ما يؤكل مشحونة فمن جد شويناه وعصبنا مصارينا ونددنا عليه نعنع البقل وترخونة وفرخ وافر الزور أجدنا لك تسمينة وتهيوج وفروج أجدنا لك ترجينة وسنبوجة مقلوة في إثر ترضينا وحمراء من البيض إلى جانب زيتونة وطلع كنظام الدر في الأصفات مكنونة وأوساط شطيرات بزيت الماء مدهونة يولدن لذي التخمة جوعا ويشهين برخف ككسور الدر بالعنبر معجونة وحريف من الجبن به الأوساط مقرونة، وقد أرهف للتقطيع والتفصيل سكينة، وخل ترعف الآناف منه وهي مختونة، وباذنجان بوراني به نفسك مفتونة، وهليون وعهدي بك تستعذب هليونة، ولو زنجة في المسك والسكر مدفونة، وعندي لك دستيجة مطبوخ وقنينة، وساق وعدت بالقطف منه قطفة نونة، له شدة ألحاظ وفي ألفاظه لينة، وقمري يغنينا لحونا غير ملحونة، ألا يأتي محزون نأى عن دار محزونة، فما عذرك في أن لا ترى من السكر تيمة. So, and my English translation reads as follows. When will you come to eat? The table has been set, and the chef has adorned it, how rain dresses gardens in marvels. It's spread before us, heaped with delectable dishes, a roasted kid with ospan, garnished with minted legumes and tarragon, a plum-breasted pullet that we selectively bred, grouse and chicken braised in a tagine, fried samosas overlapping with sardine, red-dyed eggs served with olives, palm pollen like string of pearls nestled in a jewelry box, open-faced sandwiches brushed with an oily relish that wet and tempt every indulgent appetite, with bites like pearl shavings kneaded with ambergris, a sharp cheese for a filling spread, an ornate knife for cutting and slicing, vinegar that flares up noses even before it's unsealed, aubergine burrani that will enchant you, asparagus unlike any other, and I know you've relished many, musk-scented lausinage doused with sugar, cooked wine that comes in dastija jugs and bottles, and dimple-chinned cupbearers with voluptuous promise, fiery eyes and honeyed words, and a singer who coos like a turtle dove, sweet tunes never heard before. So why would a jilted lover far from his love's abode rather drink himself out of his senses than come join us? So I've constructed some sort of menu that divides most of the dishes that appear in this poem into appetizers, main dishes, desserts, drinks, etc. And it's like slightly quite long, so maybe I'll just read like selected dishes. So, for instance, when it comes to appetizers, he talks about a certain aubergine burrani, which is actually an old Persian dish. And it's made of aubergine slices fried in a mix of olives and sesame oils, dressed with nabati and muri, which is a kind of fermented sauce, spices, and drew leaves. Ospan, which is an old Arabic dish, and it's made of roasted liver wrapped in herby cold fats and crispy salted intestines. And this is an interesting one, open-faced sandwiches, which is slices of oven-baked bread brushed with olive oil relish. And date palm pollen, which is fresh date palm pollen of the male date palm, which used to be considered as an aphrodisiac. When it comes to the main dishes, there's yet another old Persian dish, which is called tardine, and it's baked triangular meat patties made with lean meat, onions, and spices, drizzled with olive oil and served with mustard. And there's pullet, which is slices of pullet breast grilled to succulence, drizzled with sweet almond and cucumber sauce, and garnished with fresh chopped thyme, mint, and basil.
This is also appetizing, by the way. It's just salivating just listening to you. Sorry, please continue.
When it comes to the desserts, there is lauzinage, which is an old Persian dessert. Sweet pastry stuffed with a mixture of almonds, pistachios, rosewater, cloves, and white cane sugar, drizzled with almond oil and a dusting of sugar, then perfumed with musk. And for drinks, which are served in Persian dastijas, which are large glass jugs with 2 handles. There is cooked wine, which is considered halal because when it's boiled, the alcohol content just evaporates. An aged and sweet-smelling wine made from grapes, honey, spring water, and saffron, boiled on an open fire until the alcohol content is evaporated.
Thank you so much, Salma. I'm going to get to both of you with a few questions, and I just want to thank you both so much for 2 very different poems, but I think poems that show the wide range of how food poetry can be created and perceived. Katie, following off of your reading, I'd like to ask, this obviously is 20 years is nothing, is so caught up in mythology that may not be immediately associated with Venezuela. It mentions Ulysses and Penelope and Calypso and Circe, and I wonder what you think Lena's preoccupation is with those Greek mythological figures in this poem. Are there modern parallels, or is it fully does it fully place itself in the time of those myths when they were more widely taken as gospel in Europe?
So I think quite a few things to mention here. One is just how often Penelope appears across a lot of the Venezuelan poets that I've read. I think because migration is such a huge question at the moment for Venezuelan writers, she often appears as this figure of the person left behind who is waiting for people to come back, but knowing that things are changing. With the Odysseus story, I think also the fact that it's 20 years was quite relevant, partly, as I said in the introduction, because it links to the 20 años no es nada, which started off as a tango, but became just a famous phrase that is often used. But particularly, I think at the time that Lena was writing, it was around 20 years that Hugo Chavez's government, or later Nicolas Maduro's government, had been in power. So that idea of kind of how the country has changed over those 20 years. But also this poem is in a section of the book which is called Relecturas, or rereadings, which, while still thinking about food, also make reference to previous writings. So obviously that one has Odysseus, but there's one about Narcissus. There are some about much more contemporary writers, so one based on David Foster Wallace, for example, or the Venezuelan poet Eugenio Montejo. So in other sections of the book, it's much more modern. There's a whole section about different food stuff, so jelly beans, peanut butter, toast and butter, all of these sorts of things. There's one that's kind of more based on a menu, but yeah, in this particular section, it's all kind of rereading famous writing, but through the lens of food, which, as I said, is always her preoccupation.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really, really, really interesting, and particularly it's fascinating that Penelope is a figure that recurs. I mean, it makes obvious sense when you explain it, but that's something that I think a lot of our readers will be very interested to know. Salma, I'd love to ask you, first of all, how did you encounter Kuşacığım's work, and what has your involvement been with their work before? Is this sort of the first time you've translated them, or have you been translating them for a while? And what led you to this poem in particular?
So generally speaking, I'm more passionate about translating poetry than prose. I just feel, unlike most people who think that translating prose is easier, with me, it just the musicality of poetic language just comes naturally to me. And I've translated like many Arabic poems, both from like contemporary, classical, and like pre-modern poems as well. And Kuşacığım has actually been kind of like a personal challenge. His poems are often written in the form of riddles, so they are very complicated, and obviously because they were all just recited in the setting of a court, so obviously they wouldn't have a title, and this is the idea of the poems, to entertain the caliph and his guests. So he would start reciting a poem, and then the audience would try to guess what he's talking about. And also another difficulty that I've encountered in his poems is that he often uses old Persian words. So obviously he writes in classical Arabic, but then it was considered a kind of it's like intellectually and culturally a standard of the elite to know Persian and Turkic and other not just languages and words, but also to know about their own life practices and habits and culinary choices, etc. So, and he would then just show off his knowledge in his poems, like kind of like flexing his muscle. Like, look at me, I know what the Persians actually eat in their courts as well. And this would actually influence court life in Syria and the Abbasid period. So he would tell them about what people eat in the far reaches of Iran, and that would influence the Abbasid caliphs to, oh, I want this dish, bring me that dish now. I'm not going to eat anything else until you bring me this dish. Also, so I've translated things from Old Arabic that date back to the 6th and 7th centuries before the advent of Islam, for instance, by the poetess Al-Khansa. And I've also translated things that are contemporary to Kushayjam, like the 10th and 11th century poet Al-Mutanabbi. But Kushayjam's poems from the 10th century always stands out as like the most difficult to decipher. And that's what's very appealing from my point of view. It's kind of like a personal challenge to try to figure out what he's talking about. So I've been working on Kushayjam since the spring of 2021. I've been involved in a 6 months mentorship with the National Center for Writing as part of their Emerging Translators mentorships. And Sawad Hussein did a brilliant job in encouraging me and supporting me through the entire process. And then later on, I also worked on Kushayjam again, just on the side as part of the British Center for Literary Translation workshop on literary translation, I forgot what it's called exactly, with Nariman Youssef. We mainly worked on prose, but also every now and then I would show her, like, can you take a look at this poem? What about this poem? And again, she was very supportive. And
yes, I love both Sawad and Nariman's work. Sawad Hussein and Nariman Youssef, you should really check them out. You're very lucky to have worked with both of them. I'll get back to you in a bit. But I wanted to ask Katie, so how did you and Colaboratorio Avila come to get to know Lena Yao and you know, have permission to translate her poetry, and what has that experience been like?
So I, in my other life, research Venezuelan writing, so I was very familiar with Lena already. In fact, she sent me a copy of Trae tu Espalda, I think 2017, and it's taken this long to get around to actually translating it. Also her and Raquel, so Raquel Vivas Rojas, one of the members of Colaboratorio, is a writer, poet, translator herself, and so Lena and Raquel often kind of work together to kind of share drafts of whatever they're working on. And so when we saw Food Focus, we thought, who better than Lena? We'd always been really interested in her writing, but had never tried to translate her before, and just thought if anyone was going to be in this issue, it had to be Lena. And she was incredibly excited about the whole thing as well, I think, because she's so interested in food that seeing all of these poems from across the world and the way that they deal with food has been a total journey for her.
Oh, I'm very, very happy to hear that. And also I was wondering, you know, what have you learned about, why do you think Lena is so obsessed with food writing? Why is that? Why has she focused her career and her artistic output on this topic?
I think because food is in everything. So across the various output of hers, we can think about food and personal relationships. So Trae tu espalda, I think, particularly looks at kind of romantic relationships, and how food is sort of always there. She makes links with the idea of the tongue tasting food, but also being used in lovemaking. But she's written a novel called Hormigas en la Lengua, which is called Ants on the Tongue, which is very much about migration, both people who migrated to Venezuela, because Venezuela has a real history of people coming from across Europe, and also parts of the Middle East, parts of other parts of Latin America, and bringing with them their food. So the novel is very much from the point of view of these second-generation immigrants who have grown up in Venezuela, but all have different food traditions that link them to their parents. And the idea that that's something, it's so visceral, it's something with a real kind of sense memory attached to it, that even if you don't really know anything else about what your parents lived through before they came to the country that you were born in, you knew what they ate, what that smells like, what that tastes like, what that feels like.
No, for sure. I mean, it is, and it's fascinating also how it seems, just learning about Lena's work more through you, it seems like the various prisms that she uses food for are so varied as well, from, as you mentioned, the romantic to, you know, the socio-political and greater issues of migration through both a very intimate lens and both sort of a wider macro view. That's fascinating, and I honestly can't wait to read more of her work as a result. Thank you.
I will send you more.
Please, for sure. Yes. And I think maybe just to sort of wrap up, I'm going to ask both of you if it's a bit cheeky because I haven't asked you or told you these questions beforehand. But if there's another work in the issue that either of you have read and sort of that you particularly enjoyed or liked, or made you think about your own translation or writing practice in a different way, or that you just that just made you hungry. Yeah, take your time, because I know that I didn't send these questions in advance, but just kind of wanted to spring it on you, if that's all right. Thank you for bearing with me.
Is it okay if it's not from the food section?
Yes, of course.
Just because I really enjoyed reading the Humberto Acabal poems. Fantastic to hear about a poet who originally wrote in Quiche Maya, who self-translated into Spanish and then from that was translated into English.
Yes, absolutely. I love all these poems by Humberto Acabal, translated by Michael Bazet from the Spanish. And as you mentioned, you know, Humberto Acabal wrote these originally in Quiche Maya, self-translated into Spanish, and then that was what was translated. And I also love learning from Michael's introduction that in 2004, he declined to receive the Guatemala National Prize in Literature because it was named for Miguel Angel Asturias, whom Acabal accused of encouraging racism, noting that his views offend the indigenous population of Guatemala, of which I am part. Thank you. I'm glad to hear you also enjoyed those. Salma, is there anything from the issue that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, I actually enjoyed reading one of the reviews about it's by Mayeda Brahim. The title is Dwelling in Detachment, and it's a book review about Fadi Judith's translation of Maya Abul Hayat's book. And
yes, I love that book very much, and I love this review as well. You Can Be the Last Leaf, Milkweed Edition, 2022. Yeah.
I personally really like Fadi Judith's translation. Like he's not just a translator, he's like most of us, a translator curator, and I particularly love his translations of Mahmoud Darwish. They're always like, inspiring. And just knowing that he translated something by Maya Abul Hayat, I'm actually very excited about it and looking forward to reading it myself.
Yeah, and I think Fadi Judah is also, as you mentioned, he's curator and a translator, but also a poet himself, which I think helps a lot with his translations. I also enjoy his poetry in English. So yes, thank you so much, both of you, for your generous time and care, and obviously for sending in your remarkable work. And I hope to stay in touch with both of you and with Colaboratoria Avila as a whole, and to continue to have you be part of this MPT community. Thank you both so much for being here, and thank you for being part of Rabbit and Banana Leaves, the food focus. Thank you both. Bye.
Thank you.